Joining me now is the Senior Manager of Government Affairs and Public Policy at Google South Africa, Abongile Mashale. Abongile, thanks so much for joining us today. Lovely to have you on. Now, AGOA is underway at the Johannesburg Expo Center in Nasrec, and I just would like to know, as an American business, how has AGOA benefited the business, or working within Africa benefited the business so far?
Well, as even though we are an American company, our sector is a fairly new one. Google is 25 years old. So when AGOA first came into being 20 years ago, we were just a 5-year-old tech startup. So AGOA really doesn't have an ICT tech focus, which is why for us it's important to be here, because when we're talking about a modern AGOA, there's no way we can talk about it without talking about the digital industry, the tech sector, and how we can cultivate and ensure that we grow that in Africa, and we also promote the relationship between US-based companies and African tech companies to make sure that we accelerate Africa's digital transformation.
Now, just walk us through that digital transformation and how we are working hand in hand with African countries, considering that our transformation is quite slower than the Western countries.
Well, you can never talk digital transformation without talking about access to the internet. If you don't have access to the internet, there's no transformation that will happen. And access to the internet requires investment in infrastructure. In Africa right now, we have $100 billion deficit. So the amount of money we need invested into the market to build digital infrastructure that requires partnerships from government, that requires partnerships from the private sector to make sure that we invest in ensuring that we have people have access to the internet, and also have people have access to affordable devices so that they can have a smartphone. Not everyone has a smartphone in Africa, so how do we make sure that more people have smartphones? So when we're talking about transformation, we're talking about investment in infrastructure, we're talking about investment in skills, because we need to make sure that we take our people along on the journey so that they can utilize the tech platforms and the e-commerce facilities that we have available. But over and above that, which is my favorite, how do we develop African tech products so that they can be exported to external markets? We have a lot of startups, tech startups that we have in different parts of Africa, in South Africa, in Nigeria, in Kenya, that we support through our accelerator programs, that we support through our Google Black Founders Fund, where we want to have more ICT or more applications that are coming from Africa, and we're seeing a big deal of that in fintech in South Africa, and also in the health sector as well.
Now, considering that the Google is a baby when it comes to when AGOA was established, with what we've seen so far and the progress we've seen, we've heard a lot of members within the private sector saying that it is underutilized. What's Google's take on that?
I've just had a similar interview where that question was asked, and obviously it would be a bit difficult for us to talk about the utilization of AGOA, because it hasn't really been incorporated or integrated in our sector as yet. But what I think would be important, so whatever we agree on here, governments and industries across the region, as well in Africa as well as in the US, we need to find a way to institutionalize what is contained in the Act. If we do not institutionalize it, be it through policies that will enable growth of the industrial sector or manufacturing sector, if we do not institutionalize it through the governance mechanisms, through the trade and customs duties that we put in place, then obviously people will not know, because it's not being implemented, it's not being executed. So institutionalizing the outcomes from the AGOA agreement or from this forum would be important, particularly for African governments, which is why I think the AFCTA is a very important instrument that we have in Africa, and making sure that there's coherence between what the AFCTA is requiring as well as what AGOA is putting in place is very important. That coherence and harmonization is the one thing that I think in Africa we haven't really pushed as much as we should, and it is one of the barriers that we are putting in place for ourselves when it comes to trade.
So I guess your collaboration is really, really key. Now let's talk about some of the efforts that Google is doing across Africa. I know you mentioned some of the projects that you are working on. Is there anything else that the company is working on?
Well, on an infrastructure basis, for instance, if you look at our Equiano subsea cable, in all the countries where we have landed, we've partnered with telcos in those countries so that they can do the connectivity from the ocean, which is the landing station, and bring the fiber and the connectivity into the country. So that shows the importance of partnership between the private sector. So that's one area. Second area of partnership is with government to develop policies that will be enabling for the tech sector, policies that will be harmonized for the tech sector for it to be able to thrive, not only for Google as a multinational, but also for tech startups and tech companies that are coming into or that are growing in the market, so that at least they know what the expectations and what the requirements are when it comes to cyber security, to localization of data, when it talks to data privacy. How do we make sure that we have the same harmonized regulatory framework across the African continent? And that's where the partnership with government becomes important. And as Google, we've been proactive in all the countries that we have a presence in, and even in countries where we don't have a presence in proactively engaging with governments to say, these are the practicalities you need to consider when you're putting laws in place, because tech, not everyone understands the tech sector. So we're proactive in having those engagements. Partnerships as well with governments on skills development, because we've got the content, we've got the training programs. Google has Coursera certificates, for instance, where we issue scholarships for young people to be trained, or not even young people, anyone who wants to be trained on cyber safety, on data analytics, on UX design. We actually partner with different government institutions, with universities and civil society to make sure we distribute those scholarships and we get as many people on the African continent with the necessary technical digital skills so that they can start being active economic participants in the digital market.
Abongile, before I let you go, you mentioned something around privacy and understanding the technology or the tech sector in particular. I mean, recently we've had a number of countries crack down on tech companies. We've seen it in the EU. We've recently had the Competition Commission also saying the same thing. Just how much of an impact does that have on tech companies?
Well, central to our business is data, so it's important to make sure that as we process data, we have the necessary safeguards, complying with the laws in the different countries to ensure that we protect and safeguard personal information of individuals. So in South Africa, for instance, that would be compliance with the POPIA legislation. So as Google, it's actually one of the central tenets of our policy framework and our design of our products to make sure that we protect and safeguard personal information and personal data. Where it becomes an issue is if there are different requirements in terms of how you process data from one country to the next. And that's the one area where we talk about harmonization being an important component when we talk about regulating the tech sector in South Africa.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Abongile. That was Abongile Mashele from Google South Africa.